Right, we're ready to go with our public hearing item.
Yes, item number 18 is adoption of a resolution adopting the final negative declaration for the Riverview Springs addition, introduction of an ordinance for zone amendment to change the zoning designation of APNs 158-030-404142 from medium density residential B to medium density residential C, and adoption of a resolution granting the appeal of the Planning Commission's denial of and approving development plan and conditional use permit to permit the development of 47 apartment units in 6 buildings within the Riverview Springs apartment complex located at 4398 Rainier Way, Riverview Springs Edition. Applicant appellant James A. Carter, River Springs LTD.
In the public hearing and start with disclosures.
Staff, the appellant, as well as I've driven through there several times during the day, the night, probably 10 times in the last 2 weeks, just to see what kind of situation it is. So that's it. Thanks.
Staff.
Staff, we've received some emails and I visited the site.
Emails.
Staff, I drive by the site intermittently, and the idea, and like the mayor said, we've all received emails.
All material has been provided to the council.
Ms. Wright?
Good evening. As the city clerk said, this is an appeal hearing of Riverview Springs. Synopsis: our recommendation is to adopt a resolution adopting the final negative declaration, introduce an ordinance for a zone amendment change, and adopt a resolution granting the appeal of the Planning Commission's denial and approving the project, the development plan, and conditional use permit. The project site is a 23-acre site located west of Douglas Drive, south of North River Road, and north of the river. It's the Riverview Springs apartment complex. It was built in 1992. It has 358 apartment units presently. The site of the proposed addition is a swath at the southern end of the site. It's a little over 2 acres, and it's currently a grassy swale or a grassy rectangular area with some trees and some of the carports. It was formerly a slope down to the river before that area was raised. Here are 2 photos just to give you an idea of what the existing apartment complex looks like. Here are 2 photos of the proposed addition area showing both the grassy area and the carport areas. So the requested entitlements include a zone amendment to change the zoning from medium residential density B to medium residential density C, both of which are consistent with the general plan, but this zone amendment to C would provide for a range of 15 to 20.9 dwelling units per acre, and the proposal is for 17.3 dwelling units per acre, so the project would fit into the C zone. The second entitlement would be a development plan to permit the addition of 47 apartment units in 6 buildings with associated parking and landscaping. And then the conditional use permit allows residential density above the base density of the zone, but within the range of the zone. This is a site plan, a little hard to read, but it just shows the proposed addition areas on the southern boundary of the site. 6 buildings are proposed. We have heard a number of comments from community members, both throughout the process and at the Planning Commission hearing. Some of the key concerns that we've heard about include parking, traffic, access, noise, loss of green space, effect on property values, crime, as well as congestion and crowding. The Planning Commission considered the project in August. On August 13th, they held a hearing and voted 5-2 to recommend the City Council deny the requested zone amendment and denied the development plan and conditional use permit without prejudice by a vote of 5-2. 2 weeks later, on August 27th, they brought forward a resolution that they approved, affirming the actions they had taken on August 13th. In denying the project, the Planning Commission keyed on concerns related to parking, traffic, and emergency egress that we'll get into in a moment, And then on September 6th, the applicant filed an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision. So as you'll see in the appeal, the appellant has based their appeal on the following claims: that denial of the zoning amendment is arbitrary and capricious, that zoning consistency with the general plan is required, and that the project's proposed density is permitted under the applicable zoning designation. Just a couple comments on that. As I previously mentioned, the general plan zone are currently consistent because the RMB zone and the RMC zone are both consistent with the general plan's residential density of C. So we don't agree with that clause, and we do agree that the proposed density is permitted under the proposed zoning designation. Then the second part of the appeal was that denial of the development plan and CUP was not based on substantial evidence, and here they cite that there's no evidence of parking impacts, traffic impacts, or emergency access problems, and I'll go over each of these briefly. The project and the proposed addition exceeds the city's parking requirements. At our request, the applicant conducted a parking study, and it's in your packet. It determined that adequate parking exists on site. Part of the problem here, as you've obviously read from the background, there seems to be parking issues in the area with people parking in neighborhood areas, and many of the residents believe it's Riverview Springs residents that are parking in those areas. Based on the parking study that was done, they did not find that. In addition, the applicant has proposed a couple additional things. They've just implemented a new parking permit system, and that has implemented permit parking only for the covered parking. So each of the apartment units gets one covered parking space, but then there's no limitation on how many cars park in the uncovered spaces. And the applicant is here. I'm sure they could address that issue a little more. They have towed cars since that was put into effect. In addition, this week, the applicant looked back at their site plan and determined ways to add parking to the site. They've identified this map, the red circles, 22 additional spaces that could be provided in addition to what they were already proposing to further increase the parking supply on site. On traffic, a traffic study was also conducted. It determined that the addition area would generate 282 trips per day. And when you break this down on an hourly basis, at peak hour, that would be roughly one trip every 2.5 minutes during peak hour. And the project would not affect levels of service at any of the street segments or the intersections near the site. So it was determined not to have a significant traffic impact. And then particularly at the Planning Commission hearing, many residents brought up problems experienced during evacuation during the Lilac fire. And we met with emergency personnel, and they indicated that they are reviewing their protocols for evacuation, but they didn't believe that the additional units would cause or exacerbate the problem. And fire personnel is here if you want to address that issue. I will note that regarding parking, we submitted a revised resolution adding condition number 81, outlining that if approved, if the project is approved, that it would condition the additional 22 spaces that the applicant has identified. So with that, we are recommending that you adopt a resolution approving the negative declaration, introduce an ordinance for zone amendment ZA 16-00009 to change the zone from residential density B to residential density C, and adopt a resolution granting the appeal of the Planning Commission's denial of and approving development plan D16-00017 and conditional use permit CUP 16-00015 for Riverview Springs. Thank you.
At this time, we'll hear from the appellant.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I am Doug Kerner with the law firm Higgs, Fletcher & Mack, I'm legal counsel to the appellant, Riverview Springs, and the Carter family. I first want to thank staff for a very thorough and accurate staff report on this item. You have everything before you to make the right decision tonight, including my letter of September 6th, and it is not my intent to rehash everything in that letter or in the staff report or in the presentation you just heard. And of course, thank you for your time and consideration of this appeal. You know, I've worked with this developer on many projects over the years, and I know them to be good people with a sincere desire to be good neighbors. They also built and operate the South Coast Winery Resort and Spa, one of the top and most respected wineries in the Temecula wine country. The Riverview Apartments have been part of this Oceanside community for more than 25 years. It was built in 1992 when much of the area was still undeveloped. It has been family-owned and operated the entire time and will continue to be so. The property manager, Rhonda White, who is here tonight, has managed the property for all of the 27 years it's been in existence. The current proposed expansion will bring much-needed additional workforce housing to the city. As you know, we are in the midst of a severe housing shortage in the state and in this region. The state recently told Sandag we need to build 171,000 new housing units over the next 5 years in this region. And this project, albeit small, will help alleviate some of that housing shortage. The proposed addition of 47 apartment units meets or exceeds all of the city code requirements. It is right in the middle of the allowable density range, creates no significant impacts on traffic according to our traffic study, and is well overparked with more than 40 spaces above what is required by city code. As the staff report notes, the Planning Commission's denial was based largely on three things: traffic, parking, and emergency access or emergency evacuation concerns raised by the neighbors in the area. Rest assured that the applicant is making every effort to address each of these concerns. We've conducted a comprehensive traffic study. In response to parking concerns, we conducted a separate parking study, which showed that the project has more than sufficient parking on site with occupancy ranging from 70 to 85%. And given the distance needed to walk to the apartments, it would make little sense for tenants to park in the surrounding neighborhoods and walk to their units. It's a distance of at least 750 feet, crossing a 4-lane road that's signalized. A parking permit system has been implemented to ensure that only residents are parking in the available carports on site, and violators are being towed. I understand to date there's been at least 17 vehicles that have been towed. Apartment residents have been notified multiple times about the need for a permit and specifically instructed not to park outside the premises in any of the surrounding neighborhoods. As you heard from staff, the applicant is adding an additional 22 spaces to its current parking areas, bringing the total number of excess parking spaces to 40. This is well above and beyond what is required by city code. And with regard to emergency evacuations, I understand the fire department is here tonight to explain how that issue will be handled through the implementation of new emergency evacuation protocols. So again, thank you for your consideration. This applicant is making a massive effort to address all of the concerns, and we urge you to approve this project and grant this appeal. Our team is here to answer any questions you might have. We have our engineering consultant, we have the fellow who did the parking study, and of course, the applicant themselves are here. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Mandera, one of our engineers who did the parking study, to review some of that with you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Chris Mendiera, and I'm with Linscott Law and Greenspan Traffic Engineers in San Diego. I'd like to give you a brief executive summary of the findings of the existing parking survey and study that we conducted in July of 2017. Our firm was contacted by the applicant to provide an assessment of the existing parking and pedestrian activity in the Riverview Springs Apartments, Brisbane condominiums, and Old River Street developments. In general, the Old River Street residents had informed the city of excessive parking encroachment they were experiencing that they generally attributed to the apartments and condominiums, but that which may have been attributed to or precipitated by the closure of the northbound left turn lane from Douglas Drive to the apartments and condominiums some years back. So this was a pre-existing condition, if you will. This was a concern that was apart from the addition of the 47 units city was aware of and had asked the applicant to look into. So the city instructed the applicant to retain a qualified engineering firm to complete the parking scope of work, which the city itself had prepared. And the intent of this prescribed scope of work was twofold. First, it was to understand if there are parking deficits at any of the Riverview Springs apartments and or Brisbane condominiums, and if so, is this causing some latent demand to affect the Old River Street residents? Second, the study was designed to understand the scale and the nature of pedestrian activity at the Old River Street Douglas Drive intersection, idea being that if people are parking on Old River Street, are they crossing that major intersection to go to either the condominiums or the apartments? Broadly, the scope required parking occupancy counts to be conducted on a weekday and a Saturday during AM and PM peak periods, 3 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon, in the evening. We conducted those counts at the Riverview Springs Apartments, the Brisbane condominiums, and on Old River Street, specifically from Douglas Street east to where Old River Street curves north. We also conducted AM and PM peak period pedestrian observations at 2 locations, one at the Douglas Drive Old River Street intersection to see who was crossing to and from. We also conducted pedestrian counts on an easement that connects the Brisbane condominiums with with the Riverview Springs apartment to understand what kind of pedestrian connectivity might be occurring among all 3 parking areas. The city scope was specific, and it requested that we break the overall Riverview Springs site into subzones so that we might understand if parking occupancy was occurring uniformly over the entire site or if it was higher or lower in some locations. We did that as well for the Brisbane condominiums. Again, the idea being if parking for the subzones that were closer to Old River Street were experiencing higher occupancy, that might indicate that that there was not enough parking currently there and it was driving parking across the street. We completed the data collection that was requested, and overall the conclusions were that the apartments and the condominiums had sufficient parking reserve across both sites, both entirely and in the sub-area zones. Broadly, the Riverview Springs apartments were approximately 85% occupied, with maximum parking occupancy observed at 92% for one of the sub-area zones. The Brisbane condominiums, interestingly, were much lower in terms of parking occupancy at 60% overall, 61% on the maximum, and the parking occupancy observed on Old River Street was 81%. So in all 3 cases, parking reserve was available. Nothing was at 100%, nothing was at 95%. Again, Riverview Springs and Old River Street running in the low to mid 80s, and Brisbane condominiums running lower, around 60%. Pedestrian activity was observed at both locations, both between Riverview Springs and the Brisbane condominiums along the easement to the west, and again across the major intersection as has been discussed by the residents. By way of conclusion, we cannot conclude definitively how or if people are parking in either the Riverview Springs or Brisbane condominiums on Old River Street. Clearly parking is occurring there. No one's questioning that or doubting that. Clearly people are crossing the street to and from. But again, our observations and our methodologies couldn't allow us to make that determination conclusively. However, what we could conclusively determine was that, again, Brisbane condominiums and Riverview Springs apartments had reserve capacity, both broadly and specifically. I want to note that or reiterate that at the time that this data collection occurred, there were no parking restrictions at the Riverview Springs apartments, meaning that their permit program was not in place and people could park from anywhere in the neighborhood in Riverview Springs without issue. I'd also like to note that at the time of the parking counts, the existing Riverview Springs development right now has a 9 parking space surplus. So it's parked to city code, has a 9 parking space surplus. The project as proposed would also park to city code and have, as you heard, a 40 parking space surplus. So our conclusion is that the code is appropriate and adequate for the existing parking for Riverview Springs and would be adequate for the Riverview Springs project as proposed with the additional 47 units and the additional 40 space surplus. That concludes my executive summary. I'll be here to answer any specific questions you have. Again, my name is Chris Mendiera with Linscott Law and Greenspan. Thank you.
This time we'll move to the public. I'll call you two at a time. First, we have Michael Sumner, followed by Winston Pritchard.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Mr. Mayor, City Council, I am the Vice President of the HOA for Brisbane, and I don't know how they did their study, but the biggest concern that we have is the infrastructure of the bridges that cross the river are not able to hold the capacity of people when they had to leave. For the example, within a fire, they were at a standstill, and there's no plan right now to do anything with the infrastructure. All the roads are completely clogged, so in the event of an emergency, there's no way out. You couldn't even get out on the street from the Brisbane. They can't put in a left turn. If they do, it blocks the whole bridge. And this is one of the reasons why the Planning Commission rejected this. The other thing is the sewer is going to be maxed out. The water is probably going to be a problem. We don't have enough water as it is, right? And also, I mean, it's taken 15 years just to get reclaimed water for community use. So you're building all over the city, not just here, but all over. And everywhere you look, parking is a nightmare, traffic is a nightmare, and there's nothing being done about it. The roads are in deteriorated state. I think they're kind of putting the cart before the horse here. I think they need to work on the infrastructure and come up with a reasonable plan before they keep building and building and building. Otherwise, we're going to end up looking like LA. Just a big urban sprawl. All right, thanks for your time.
Thank you for letting me speak. I've lived across from Riverview Springs for the last 15 years. It was mentioned in one of the studies that was presented to you that there was a sloping toward the river. That never happened. The reason I believe, and it's never been mentioned, I brought it up, is there was farming back in 1992. That was a tomato farm, and I believe that the city wouldn't allow the apartments to go up to the farm. Eventually, that strip that we're talking about today, there's no farming on the other side where the farming used to be with the tomatoes is now the Brisbane condos. I believe the study of the parking is very skewed, and it's slanted to make this project look good. If a person really studied the kind of traffic that's there and that I've observed for 14 years, is when you have a 4-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, that doesn't mean just one person's living there or 2 people or 3 people. When you say 47 units, depending on a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom unit, every one of those people you know is going to have at least one automobile. So take 47 and multiply it by 2, by 3, by 4, and you're talking about a maximum of 150 more cars that are just a quarter mile from the only 2 exits out of that apartment complex. I have to admit to you that I'm one of the people that crosses the street in the morning, and if anybody wanted to study the parking and seeing the kind of traffic that piles down on that intersection, it's very dangerous. But getting out and getting in, everybody dreads leaving that area to go to work. And it's been impacted over the years worse and worse and worse, not so much because of the people that are in that apartment complex and in the condos, but it's also all the building and people that live in the eastern part of Vandergrift and Douglas. All the construction, all the housing up there, those people, just like during the Lilac Fire, there's only one way down there, and that's North River Road to Douglas and straight to the 76. So I believe I'm here to tell you that your decision to deny this project, your first decision to deny it was correct, or the Planning Commission to deny it was correct. This appeal has nothing to stand on, and if anybody really looked at that place on a Sunday morning, you'd see every car place filled up because people aren't going to work like they do Monday through Saturday. And you'd see how many people really live there or have additional cars, friends with cars. Thank you very much.
Our next two speakers are Candy Vargas and Daniel Akers.
Good evening. My name is Candy Vargas, an owner at the Brisbane Complex. I'm also a licensed realtor, so my concerns that I'm bringing to you are from the homeowners regarding the density and property values that will be affected by this. Many owners there were concerned about having more population in the area, which we've already touched on with the parking. But should they decide to sell, a project like this would have to be disclosed to a new buyer. Buyer may not want to move in while this is going on, or concerned about the density again, and may just move on, so property would sit on the market for a while and or make a low price offer. Should the seller accept it, that definitely affects the rest of the homeowners with value now, and or then that could come into play if anyone is trying to refinance. If they should decide to move while it's construction is going on and trying to rent this, that's also become a concern, or some properties are already rented. Tenants could just move out, not wanting to deal with the noise or construction that's going on. So if they did want to rent it, property values, again, lower rents might come into play because someone would not want to live there while all of this is going on, as well as an increased density in the area. So those are my concerns. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, members of the City Council. I'm Daniel Akers. I live at 26 Avenida Descanso, which is across from the Riverview Springs proposed addition. Every day I drive to work to San Diego, and I come back sometimes late. And typically when I come back at night, I have to navigate a very narrow passageway turning from Douglas Drive right onto Old River before I would get to Avenida Descanso. The parking is often right up to the edge of the street, and whether you're turning from Avenida onto Old River, or whether you're turning from Douglas onto Old River, and particularly if you have a high traffic time and you have multiple cars coming. If someone is coming out of Old River Road while I'm trying to turn into it, it's dangerous because there's a very narrow area to pass through, and this is in a non-emergency time. So the congestion on Old River, which is the only thing that I'm speaking to because I don't know about the other issues, but I do know that the congestion on Old River is real. And I do know that people are walking across the major intersection to get to their commercial vehicles, to get to their cars. They're coming clearly from River Springs, or at least from that complex. And whether it's a difficult traverse of the highway, or it's a certain number of feet that would not make sense to travel, they're doing it. And I wonder why they're doing it. There must not be adequate parking for as many cars as are actually situated. Now, I don't know what the actual code is for how many cars and how much parking is required per unit. I do know in our neighborhood where we have single-family homes, we have some homes that have 10 cars, multiple families, obviously, and there's multiple cars. My wife and I have 3 cars. One of them we hardly drive, but that's a fairly standard thing. With students, children staying home until they're 26 and not even leaving the family that soon sometimes, your individual units are requiring more cars. And for whatever the parking study says, people are parking on Old River Street. It's making it congested and difficult. And they're not homeowners on Old River Street who are parking there. In fact, one side of that whole area does not have any homes accessing it. It's just strictly a causeway, an easeway. So I would just urge you to consider that the Planning Commission had valid reasons for denying this project. My concerns have to do with the parking. If that could be addressed, I have no objection to adequate housing, but that is a significant problem. Thank you.
Our next two speakers are Oswaldo Ulloa and Chris Mendiera.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and everybody else. Sorry, first time here. Yeah, my concerns are essentially the same as all the others. Parking seems to be a pretty big issue. I'm at the Brisas community, right behind the apartments. Within the past couple of weeks, we have noticed a lot of additional traffic being over there. From my understanding is the apartment complex is now, they implemented the parking permits. Like they said, there's probably more than 2 cars per unit. So those vehicles are now parking over on our side. Same thing with Myrtle Street. That whole corner, when people are coming in and out, it's very difficult because people from the Brisbane condominiums are also parking there. That's pretty much it. Everybody else already touched on the concerns that I had. So, thank you.
Our next two speakers are Doug Kerner and True Lee.
Already spoken.
Yeah, yours. I got it. Yeah, it's.
It's going to be phone and projectors.
Oh, I do. I'll zoom for you. Yeah, I got it.
Oh, you can zoom?
Yeah, I'm doing.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Was the green, this side okay? All right. Hi, good evening, council members and mayor and everyone else. Thank you for your time. My name's True. I am in the 239, I reside off 239 Del Mesa. I'm actually going to talk from a different community perspective. From what I've heard so far, they've been around here and here. And I'm actually here because I did read the staff report, and they're talking about when they were doing the parking study, they mentioned the 3 locations that we've heard from the previous planning meeting. Now, I couldn't figure out a new trend that we'd seen in our neighborhood, which I'll show here. So this here is the top left corner of this whole unit. Does that make sense? So I'm talking about the top left of that whole blue area. What we've noticed in the last few months is actually now we're having parking issues in this neighborhood now. I've noticed more trash, and I wish this microphone can go over. So this is the inlet from my complex. It's a 136 condominium complex. And, oh, thank you. Oh, I saw a star. So right here, there's actually no house or driveway. A person has to come here, and for these homes, this is their driveway. And this house has a long driveway. But what we've noticed is that now there's more cars lining up on this street. So I'm not contesting the data of the parking study, but now there is encroachment into another residential area. And it did not exist there in prior times. We've also noticed some increased trash, and there's like cups there and all this whatnot. So that was one thing to consider. And the second one, I'd like to talk to the fire marshal to see what they had proposed as our evacuation. That was one of the concerns I brought up in August. And I had wanted to know how they were going to address the concerns because the staff report said that they would try to use another method. And as a citizen, I just want to feel a little bit better to know about the new evacuation method. And thirdly, I received the notification for this council hearing about last week. That wasn't enough time for me to reach out to my HOA since we are a 136 unit complex. I did submit an email and I forwarded to Ms. Wright earlier today when they did confirm they did not receive notification. Thank you. Oh, just in time.
Great. Our next speaker is, I believe, Shen Song.
Hi, my name is Zhen Sang. I live in 4446 Brisbane Way, just across this project right in front of me, actually. Last hearing, I addressed about this addition will have like a 41% shortage in parking for this 46 unit addition building. This time, I just want to address about the traffic. From this piece of paper, this is on the what they call the negative declaration. From this table, you can see the intersection between Douglas Drive and the Running Way. The LOS rating was A. Very surprised to me. Okay, both on the existing condition and also including existing and plus the project. Both is A. What A is means represents the highest level operating condition, which means no delay at all in traffic. But that's not true at all. What happens is there's a no left turn sign between the Douglas Drive and the Running Way. Okay, when we go home, we have to make a left turn, okay, to go home from the northbound of the traffic. But this is like, that's why they got A here, because they try to ignore there's a no left turn sign, okay? And this is this problem got diverted to a different area, which is not true. So I'm surprised this table was here and this was included in this so-called negative declaration, and I don't know how this board can approve this. Okay, they need accurate measurement for this. Re-evaluate this LOS rating here. Okay, and also. There's 54 Brisbane homeowners where I live on my side. And for us, the only way to get out from our home is making a right turn from Running Way to Douglas in order to get on the bridge. Okay, there's no other way for us out because there's a fence on another end. So the only way we can get out of our home is make the right turn on Running Way to get on the bridge. Okay, and okay, I request actually. Yeah, I from my writing back in July this year, I request City of Oceanside reevaluate the conflict with the congestion on the intersection between Douglas Drive to Running Way due to the limitation of the bridge design. Okay, the bridge design really is a kind of like a bottleneck for traffic. Okay, this is just why I found out that if any kind of emergency happened, like a fire, flood, or earthquake happens, how can you quickly and move out of this place? If they add another 54 units, okay, addition families over there, how many cars can you imagine for us to quickly evacuate in this area? I'm very concerned about this.
Can you wrap it up, please?
Yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public hearing item. Any members of the public who have not turned in a form but wish to speak on this specific item may come forward at this time. Mayor Weiss, I see none. The appellant had, oh, I'm sorry, did you want to speak on this item? Oh, please come forward.
Hello. All right, my name is Adrienne Culpepper. I spoke in August also. I live in Pacific Breeze housing community. Not a lot of people come from the Brisbane community, but we live on the opposite side of the apartment complex. And I live on Playa del Rey. My house is directly in front of where the expansion would be taking place. And as, I don't remember her name, but when she was speaking, our street is now getting the overflow of all of the traffic since these new parking permits have been coming in place. I actually had an altercation unexpectedly with one of the residents where I was coming home from work. I saw them parking and walking across, and I was curious why they were parking over here if there's adequate parking over there. So I very simply asked them, you know, do you live here? Do you live over there? Is there not parking over there? What he explained to me was that there is 4 people living in his unit. All 4 of them have cars. They were provided 1 parking permit for a covered parking, and 1 additional car can get documented, and the other cars they were told to just find somewhere else to go. He ended up getting really aggressive with me, thinking that I was being argumentative, and threatened me, saying he was going to find my house and that I had no right and that he can park wherever he wants. So now my safety, I feel, is at risk because these people are getting aggressive when we're simply asking a question. Another thing that I didn't have an opportunity to speak on last time was the noise violations. I submitted an email to the City Council this morning. I wasn't sure if I would make the meeting in time of some of the emails that I've had to have with management. Now, the manager, Rhonda, has been very communicative with me. She worked with me how she could. But unfortunately, for the entire year I have lived in my home since I bought it, I've had noise violations to the point where I couldn't even sleep in my master bedroom. I could hear them through my 2 dual pane windows, screaming, fighting, altercations, threatening, sirens, you name it. It took a year to get them evicted. So noise violations are obviously a concern for me as well. Thank you.
Hi, Mario Corral. I'm a resident of the Brisbane condo units. It's a 4-bedroom unit, and I have 3 adults in my household. Each of us have a vehicle, a car. But unfortunately, I only have two allowed parking spots, and unfortunately, I do have to take up 1 parking space out at Old River Street. Sorry about that. Old River Street. And it's just, I don't think there is enough parking spaces that was designed into those units and into the apartments. The congestion is very apparent when you're trying to leave. Today it took me 3 lights just to get out of Brisbane. You have to kind of jam yourself in there. When you're trying to leave, you see vehicles trying to fight for one of the 2 lanes making a right turn from Rainier Way over to southbound Douglas Drive. And the congestion is there. I think it's going to take away from the beauty of the area. The Greenway area is a very positive factor of that community. And just to erect another building, I don't think it's good. That parking study, I don't think it took too many things into consideration. I don't think it took into consideration the pedestrian traffic that travels at North River and Douglas. I didn't hear that mentioned. The other pedestrian traffic that travels from the northwest part of that Riverview community going to Del Mesa, that Del Mesa community. I don't think it took that into consideration. And just to say that 80% of the parking is adequate, to me it sounds, 80% sounds congested for a community parking. Appreciate your time, guys.
The applicant has how much time for rebuttal?
9 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think you heard the concerns related to traffic and parking. And as I said in my opening remarks, this applicant is making every effort to address all of these concerns. With the new permit system, notifying its residents, towing away vehicles that don't belong there, and really adding more spaces on a site that already has capacity for parking. So I understand there might be folks, I don't know if they're from Brisbane, I don't know if they're from Riverview, that may park outside the premises. Why they would do that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, because there is adequate parking on site, and there will be even more if this project is approved. With respect to traffic, you know, I think the study speaks for itself. The addition of these 47 units is going to add 23 AM peak trips and 25 PM peak trips. It's not enough to change the level of service. And so the conclusion from the traffic consultant and from city staff is that there are no significant traffic impacts. So I'll just leave you with this. I think the driving issue is parking. And again, we're doing everything we can to address it. So thank you.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do you restrict the total number of parking passes any particular resident can have?
The only restriction which was put in place, and Rhonda can, I think Rhonda's probably the best that can answer that. There's one permit per unit per carport. Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Rhonda. I'm the property manager for Riverview Springs. To answer your question about the parking permits, we, straight in the gate when somebody moves in, or our current residents, we give them one permit per household. But they can register all vehicles within their household with us. So we're not limiting like 2 vehicles only per apartment. One permit, and the covered parking structure does require a permit. The others would then need to park in uncovered parking. Now, we also offer residents the opportunity to get a second permit. That one they do pay monthly for, a small fee, $25. So they could, in fact, have 2 covered parking permits for their household, and then maybe even have a third vehicle that's parked in uncovered parking. So.
Thank you.
I hope. Yeah.
Happy to answer any other questions council might have. Okay, thank you.
We'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the council. Councilmember Kern?
Well, before we go, does staff want to address any of those issues that were brought up? There was something about the emergency exit, the capacity of the bridge, that type of thing. I would like to have that answer since the public asked it.
Honorable Mayor and council members, introduce myself for the benefit of the audience. David Parsons, I'm the Division Chief of Fire Prevention and the Fire Marshal for the City of Oceanside. There was a question I'd like to address also by one of the speakers regarding a process for evacuations. I had the benefit also being in the emergency evacuation or emergency operations center when evacuations were taking place during the Lilac fire last December. It's a highly coordinated event. We work with police department, sometimes public works, other agencies to coordinate the movement of people out of harm's way. We did have some lessons learned. We use the reverse 911 system as our primary way of notification. And due to some training issues and some procedural issues that we've worked on, and we mentioned to staff that we worked with, we're improving how we do that. If you look at evacuations across the county, there's gridlock every single time. It's a management problem, it's a coordination problem, and something that we're constantly working on improving. So we have actually improved, we've done some training and worked on procedures on narrowing down how we evacuate people. This was a fast-moving event, and obviously those create chaos in the community at the time. And working with outside agencies that are helping us run the fire, CAL FIRE in that instance, because it started in an outside area, outside of the jurisdiction of Oceanside, created some coordination and logistical issues. But we've worked through that and improved how we do the process. And essentially, it's moving people appropriately in a certain manner, in a certain area. For example, most threatened first, least threatened last, things like that, versus a blanket coverage, which is how it was done in the past. So procedurally, we've worked on improving that process. When it comes to this particular project, obviously adding vehicles and people to the mix is going to have an impact. But when you look at the total population and how we do our work, we feel it's less than significant of what we're already having to deal with. Now, as it accumulates, as larger projects come in, obviously we're going to have more conversations and figure out how we're going to do this better, whether it's creating more egress points, working with our partners in Camp Pendleton and moving the other direction, using College, for example, and North River, for example. So we don't speak directly to the policy part of it, but in terms of procedures, in terms of how it's going to impact actual egress and the evacuation process, we can deal with the evacuation process through our means, and then the number of people and the number of cars, like I said, it will be an impact, but we feel it's less than significant to what's already in place and occurring.
Thank you, Chief. The sequence, and we've learned a lot of lessons learned from the Lilac Fire, so about
Yes.
sequences, and I think part of it we've learned. So thank you. I hope that addresses that issue. I don't have any further questions unless.
Any further questions?
And I'm sure my colleagues will call you back up
Okay.
if they have one. Obviously, the traffic is not the issue so much as the parking. And it sounds like they're addressing the parking. It sounds like they're adding parking spaces. It sounds like they don't restrict parking other than the covered parking, that they try to do it on site. And looking at even the one lady that brought up the traffic study, loss of service is negligible or whatever. So we're talking 282 trips a day. And the new buildings are going to be adequately parked. They're going to have their own parking. Part of the issue is, and I think the gentleman brought it up, that even in the single-family homes, you're having more and more adults. Part of the problem that you have more and more adults because there's a lack of attainable housing in the area, that the adults are living at home longer because they can't find a place to rent or buy. And so the idea that we are in a housing crisis, we need to add housing, and this one here, they're just adding on to it, actually in the back. So I think it's a good project. I mean, I understand the concerns of the neighborhood about the parking, but there's also a concern in the area and the region and the state about adequately housing people. Like the Sandag study, the 100 and some odd thousand units that we need to add. So unless we do something about that, and I mean, we will always have this problem. In my neighborhood, and it's all single-family homes, we have a parking problem because we have children, adult children, people in their 30s, living at home with their parents, and they all have cars because they cannot find a place to rent or buy. So until we address that underlying problem of finding adequate housing across the region, we're always going to have that problem. And I don't even, I live probably a couple blocks from 2 major apartments, and that's always been an issue. So anyway, I'm going to recommend that we grant the appeal and go with staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you. This is a very, very dense project, and it's 358 units. If you conservatively just have 2 people, just 2 in each unit. Obviously, they're each going to have a car. That's 716 cars. If you have 3, which I still think is conservative, I really think there's more like 4 people in each unit. But just 3, that's 1,074. You're already underparked. It's becoming a problem in terms of encroaching into other neighborhoods, and that's a big concern of mine. My issue with this project, and this is discretionary, by the way, I don't see that there was ever plans. I believe staff was not able to find any reference to some kind of future development here. It looks to me it was part of the landscaping. With such a high density project, you need to have that green. It looks like you have sections, and each section has a swimming pool. So you've got 3 swimming pools, and they're very dense. So what you're trying to create is a sense that there is, some amenities, and to then go back and increase the densities where I believe we didn't even have, this is not even part of our housing goals, projects. It's discretionary. It's not, you don't have a right to the change in zones. You don't, this is a conditional use permit. These are things that are discretionary. You don't have a right to it under the law. So I see what the basis for the Planning Commission, which was a 5-2 decision to deny. I am concerned that this is very dense project, that there is not a whole lot of places where kids can play, and this was part of the landscaping, and you're basically creating more problems for us with other communities, and we're going to be hearing about it forever if this is built. And the concern also is that we don't have any public transportation down here. I have friends that live in the valley here. I know family, and oh my gosh, the bus is just so difficult to ever catch. And my understanding of NCTD is that they're looking for more routes to cut, not to create, certainly not to add. So I think that the project looks good already. That's what people bought into. This sense of amenity, the amenities, certainly high cost of housing. Yes, I understand we need to create more housing, but I think here is not the best place to do it. The staff reported, the presentation was, well, we've always thought about doing something here. Well, there's nothing in the staff report that says that, and I inquired, and it doesn't look like this was ever an intention. This is a new thing. I'm sure that, there's always a potential, always looking for ways to increase, profits, and of course that's the business that, that we're in. But it seems to me that we're just going to create more problems than solve. That's my thing here, is that we already have keen into getting in and out of this project. It's difficult, and it's one of the pros and cons of living here, which I'm sure was taken into consideration. And you thought, okay, well, at least we have a little bit of green, but you're going to take some of that green away and add more people wanting cars. More, you can't walk very far to the nearest. I guess CVS is around somewhere, but I don't see a whole lot of people walking. Maybe their dogs, but certainly not walking back and forth to work or shopping. So I'm not going to be able to support the request to approve this project. So I believe that the Planning Commission did the right thing here. Thank you.
Councilmember Feller.
Thank you. First question I have is, how many covered parking spaces are there? 358?
How many covered spaces?
Covered.
354.
354, okay, thank you. So every condo right now will have a covered spot individually, and then the rest is open. My question then is going to be, why do they, every time I drove through there was probably a minimum of 30, probably 50 vacant covered spaces. And why would they not be parking there? So if you could want to come back up, I would like to answer why they don't park in that space. Sorry to put you on the spot here.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, you're asking why are the residents not parking in covered parking?
Yes. Well, if every unit has a covered unit, why aren't they parking in it?
I think some residents, quite honestly, they have permits, they can park in covered parking, but because parking is abundant on the property, both covered and uncovered, sometimes people would rather park in an uncovered space that's right next to or in front of their apartment if they're coming in with their children, groceries, their hands are full, and so forth, as opposed to down 10, 15 spaces in a covered carport space that may be available. That may be what's available closest to them at the time.
So so you're going to see what I'm getting at here. If they're permitted in a covered parking place and taking the vacant uncovered spaces, and they can't park, other people can't park in the permitted spaces, what do we do?
Well, we did start the second permit per each household, so that will take 2 vehicles. We have also dispersed notices to our residents. If you have a parking permit, please park your vehicle under a covered parking structure, because we want the guest parking, the additional parking, to be accessible for persons who don't have the permits in their vehicles.
You have a lot of parking in this, so there should be no reason for them to be going off site. And it came to me while I was sitting here is why I'm asking these questions, because it was my suggestion that you as an organization talk about with your tenants about not parking over on Old River and around the corner. So what I'm going to suggest is to try to figure out how to make everybody use their own parking spots first. The ones that they're already permitted for. You know, it might not be convenient, but that's...
Like an assigned space.
Use their assigned space first, and, you know, that will leave the other... You can't have 50 spaces in the project, and if there's complaints about parking in other parts of the neighborhood across on Old River, or, you know, I doubt seriously if they're impinging or is that good? I don't know. I make up words sometimes, so. But I'm just kind of curious. Why would they not use the parking there as opposed? I mean, I get it, 4 cars in one apartment, but there's adequate room.
Yes.
On your site.
Yes, there is. I believe that there's ample parking, both covered and uncovered parking, quite honestly. even with the permit program that has gone into effect. Therefore, we haven't had a need, at least as of yet, to assign parking spaces, with that being the case. And as you said, you can drive through and you will see parking available throughout the entire property.
Yeah, under construction, you're going to have a different scenario, I can tell you that. Brisbane was approved subsequent to this, probably the early 2000s. I'm just wondering, is there adequate parking?
Okay.
You can relax. What kind of parking they are required in there? It's the same 2 and a handful of.
I didn't look into specifically what their parking requirements were. They do have garages and some open spaces.
Maybe I could get an answer.
I can answer. We have required parking and everybody has stickers. Those who have a 2-car garage have 2. Those who have a single-car garage have a open space and a garage to park in. And if they need a visitor space for any length of time, they have to request that. For example, if somebody has a nurse that's coming in or relatives that are visiting, they can get an additional parking permit temporarily. All right.
Yeah, okay.
I want to throw something out here that I tried to mention earlier, but I forgot.
I'm sorry, but the public hearing is closed.
All right, that's fair enough.
I'm getting at parking here, so. And on Old River, I've driven that, like I said, at least 10 or 12 times just in the last 2 weeks. And I've seen maybe 6 or 8. I've seen a lot of cars parked on the, what would be the south side of Old River Road. And I'm sure some of those are tenants or residents on that side of the road. That was all farmland. Yasakochi had that at the time, and we didn't have banks on the river at that time, so it did slope to the river. It was sold many years ago. They put in the shopping center first, and then after Riverview, the Riverview was in when they sold, and then they put in the shopping center in Brisbane, and in Brisbane all was approved a couple of different times. And actually, never mind. That's only going to start a fight, and she'll talk again. So I want people to know that that's a busy area already. There's plenty of buses going by out there, bus stops right outside. So that is something that is available. The question I have is, there's 2 ways out of Brisbane, out behind the shopping center onto North River Road, and out behind, or out on Rainier and onto, and it's right turn only. But it can go, you can go straight across there, I believe, can't you? Is that right? Am I? Mario was shaking his head no, and I just want to make sure. I wanted to.
David DePero, City Traffic Engineer, Honorable Mayor and Council members. It's a traffic signal, and I believe it is allows for a left through or right if you're going eastbound out of the driveway.
Is my 10 minutes up?
Yes.
Jeez Louise.
Aw.
I'm starting to act like Esther. So.
Darn it.
Okay, so I know there's a bridge retrofit coming.
That's correct.
So that's one of the big concerns. I think if we can make sure that the traffic is can flow out of there, I think they have plenty of green spaces. Just looking at the project, and I'm gonna second the motion, and that way Peter won't gavel me down.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lowry.
Thank you, Mayor. David, I have no more questions for you. Thank you. I think this project has been analyzed to death, and I think that both the developer and the consultants and the legal counsel have presented great detail on this project, but I also listened to the residents and all of their concerns, and I also reviewed what the Planning Commission had concerns about on this project. So though I am in favor of developing property like this to make it more dense, because that's the only way we can keep the prices down for people who actually want to live there. We are not forcing anybody to move into these places, even though it's out there on bus routes that take you an hour to get downtown. Everyone seems to be able to buy a car because I think they're working. So they have to be able to have in and out access into their homes and to do whatever it is they want to do outside of that. It is not up for the city council to make random decisions here about density and traffic and parking and noise. So that's why we count on staff to come up with their reviews of the regulations, and then we can make a decision on whether or not it's something that we're interested in. I am personally not interested in going against this decision by the Planning Commission, and I want to really observe what the community members are presenting to us here. But I have to point out that the state of California may not let us say no for very much longer, but I'm going to say no to this based upon Planning Commission and what the residents have said. If I were going to vote the other way, I would say that this developer and their staff have done an excellent job of covering all of the issues, and whether or not someone doubts a specific part about the parking plan or says that, oh my God, there's 4 people living in each place and each one of them has 1.25 cars, that's going to put 5 cars, whatever, people can deal with that. So our decision up here is to either approve or deny the appeal, and I'm going to deny the appeal, so that's how I'll vote. Thank you.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you. I just want to, because I'm a little confused here about the parking. I read the staff report, and it says there are 358 in the existing part, 358 apartment units, and 769 covered and uncovered parking spaces. So I'm hearing that if people wanted to have 3 cars, they could park on site. And 358 times 3 is 1,074. Are there more than the 769? Are there additional parking spaces that I don't see in the staff report?
No, not currently, but our parking regulations only require that they have less than that.
Yeah, I get that, but I heard from the applicant, oh yeah, people can park 3-4 cars on site, and the math doesn't bear that out. 3 cars is 1,074, and you only have 769 covered and uncovered. So I just wanted to get that clear. I thought maybe there were some other parking spots that were not included in the staff report. Thank you very much.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Mullen.
Thank you. So the motion is to grant the appeal and approve. The resolution approves the development plan and the conditional use permit. Along with this, though, we have an ordinance to rezone the property, so I'll go ahead and title the ordinance. This is the introduction of an ordinance of the City of Oceanside amending the zoning designation for certain real property located at 4398 Rainier Way from medium density residential B, REMB, to medium density residential C, RMC, Riverview Springs Edition, ZA 16-00009.
Please vote.
Motion approved, 3-2. Lowry, Sanchez, no.
Before we adjourn, I would just like to make a brief announcement. We found out this afternoon that Dr. Hugh LeBounty passed away today. For those of you who knew him, he was a very thoughtful and diplomatic person. He exhibited quiet leadership and had the ability to develop consensus on significant issues. He was a long-standing member of the city's Economic Development Commission and was a critical member of the development of El Corazon, both the vision plan and the master planning process. He left a significant impact on many lives and on the city of Oceanside, and he will be missed by many of us. And I would like to end this meeting with a moment of silence for Dr. LeBounty. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned until 3:30 Wednesday, November 28th.